has told LBC they have no choice.
It's a shame that they've politicised a war that we didn't start, a defensive war. We didn't want any of this. We had tried. We've had 5 wars with Gaza, all of them started by them.
A coroner has concluded an 11-year-old girl was killed unlawfully when she drowned at a water park in Windsor. An inquest heard there were no deep water signs at Liquid Leisure and staff weren't qualified to perform underwater rescues. A woman who posted a racist rant on the day of the Southport attacks has failed to have her jail sentence reduced. Lucy Connolly, the wife of a Tory councillor, was handed 31 months for calling for hotels housing asylum seekers to be set on fire. And demolition of Grenfell Tower could begin in September. Next month marks the 8th anniversary of the fire in West London, which killed 72 people. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 81 points at 87.81. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.18. LBC weather, showers in the west easing this evening. Rain moving into southwest England and South Wales. Drier in the north, a low of 2 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. This afternoon, something finally snapped. A British government so long prepared to give Israel the benefit of the doubt today changed direction. Ministers have decided, along with their colleagues in Canada and in France, that the level of human suffering in Gaza is now intolerable and the way Israel is behaving completely unacceptable. Talks on our proposed new trade deal with Israel have been suspended. The Israeli ambassador has been summoned to the Foreign Office to be told the 11-week blockage of aid to Gaza is cruel and indefensible. Named individuals, including the prominent settler leader Daniela Weiss and organizations who have promoted illegal Israeli settlement in the West Bank, including threatening Palestinians, are being sanctioned, face travel bans, and will have their assets frozen. It's all very similar to the treatment of prominent Russian supporters of Putin after his invasion of Ukraine. If Israel does not stop the war and doesn't let in the aid, then further measures are promised. They're not spelt out, but could they finally include ending arms exports to Israel? Now, I know a lot of people will say this is all just gesture, politics, mostly words and too late, but I think I detect a genuine change of direction. Listen now to David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, speaking to the Commons this afternoon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we are now entering a dark new phase in this conflict. Netanyahu's government is planning to drive Gazans from their homes into a corner of the Strip to the south and permit them a fraction of the aid that they need. Yesterday, Minister Smodrick even spoke of Israeli forces cleansing Gaza. Destroying what's left of residents, Palestinians, being relocated, he said, to third countries. We must call this what it is. It is extremism. It is dangerous. It is repellent. It is monstrous, and I condemn it in the strongest possible terms.
This is the biggest break in the language used about Israel by the British state that I can remember. It seems to me that Israel has got itself caught in an impossible cycle of violence. The more Palestinians they kill, the more scared they are about the revenge one day from those still left alive. And so on it goes. This Israeli government has collapsed 2 groups together, the unspeakably violent Hamas and the Palestinian people, and it's treating them as a single enemy. It doesn't want to live next to Gaza. The extremist Israeli cabinet minister, Bezalel Smotrich, mentioned by the foreign secretary there, has boasted that Israel will entirely destroy Gaza. I don't know much, but I know this. Trying to eradicate the Palestinian people makes it almost certain that Israel, decades ahead, will face worse and deadlier terrorism than ever. I don't think it's anti-Israeli to say that the way this Israeli government is now treating civilians, including babies and children, may one day destroy Israel itself. Now, as you'd expect, in the interest of fairness, we asked for the Israeli ambassador tonight, but she isn't available. I'm sure we can have that conversation another day, but let's turn first tonight to Husam Zomlot, head of the Palestinian mission in the UK. Very good to have you here, Ambassador Zomlot. Do you regard this as a really significant change in the attitude of the British government? Perhaps too late, but it's a real change.
It is too late, but better late than never. And it is a significant change in the rhetoric, in the words, the description. And this is the first time we hear words like egregious, extremism, monstrous action by Israel, that the Foreign Secretary and the government here wholeheartedly condemns all these illegal, inhumane acts by the government of Israel and the State of Israel. The description is right, and we welcomed it. We just issued a statement welcoming this. However, we need to talk about the prescription, because the action that was taken is a first step, but might not really be good enough.
And he said there's more to come. If I was the Israeli government sitting here, I suppose what I would say is that Hamas have made it so clear that they will not rest until the state of Israel is destroyed, that the state of Israel must destroy Hamas. And while it is possible for Hamas to revive anywhere in Gaza, they have to keep going. Why are they wrong about that?
They're wrong because they themselves, the ruling party in Israel, Likud, in their charter, pledged something even much worse. And the coalition agreement of this last coalition very clear says that this government will never allow for the right of self-determination for anyone from the river to the sea except for the Jewish people. So if we take people for their talk, I think Israel will be in the red. What we need to make sure is that any party in this respects the very basic provisions of international law and respects our shared humanity. And what Israel has done for the last 19 months has dented our humanity and has ransacked every single thing you and I have worked for, have believed in for years. I mean, starving babies, Andrew, starving babies. This is Israel that you're talking about.
I think we can both agree that the words used by the Foreign Secretary just now were absolutely justified and right. All I'm saying is that in October the 7th, Hamas began something that has resulted in this horror. And you can understand that there are people in Israel so terrified of Hamas, they feel that they have to destroy anything that could harbour Hamas.
And we said from day one, on the 7th of October, that we wholeheartedly reject completely the targeting of civilians. But we also said from both sides, because our civilians have been targeted. Because the 6th of October, the UN and international organizations have announced it was the deadliest year for Palestinian children, not in Gaza, in the West Bank. So we wanted a balance. Of course, we do not in any way or shape but reject the targeting of civilians.
It's a very bad part of the world to be a harmless civilian, wherever you are.
It is.
Can I ask about the Israeli charge that Hamas have been taking aid and food for themselves, and in other words, that the starvation going on is partly Hamas's fault?
Well, food has been delivered by the UN, and the UN has been very clear. They have issued statement after statement in the last few weeks saying that our mechanism of food delivery is vetted. We know what to do, we know who needs it, and we deliver it directly, and no one intervenes. Israel wants to use food as a weapon of war. That's the bottom line. It's a method of pressure on the civilian population.
All of the sort of surrounding conversation, I think, in Israel that I'm hearing about is not just that Britain, France and Canada have changed direction, but that President Trump has as well. In his last visit to the region, he didn't visit Israel at all, and he visited a lot of Arab countries. Do you believe that the world is turning against Israel in a way that will make it impossible for Israel to carry on as she has been?
Maybe in words, but not in action yet. Take the announcement by the Foreign Secretary today. It is not talks of trade that needs to be suspended. It's trade that needs to be suspended if you want Netanyahu to pay attention and change course. And by the way, suspending trade and banning settlement products from arriving to the UK market is not a demand. It's a legal obligation upon the UK government and all other governments. We need a full arms embargo. The US, the UK still provide arms to Israel. We need to see also enforcing fully the accountability side. War criminals need to be held accountable, and we have the ICC arrest warrant. And I want to see the UK government next month on the 18th of June, will they recognize the state of Palestine? And the recognition of the state of Palestine is...
The language seems to be going that way, doesn't it?
Well, we're working with the government, we're working with the parliament, and allow me here, Andrew, really to say what we have seen today in the parliament is also thanks to the British people. You've seen the hundreds of thousands in the streets of London only 3 days ago in the weekend on Saturday. You've seen the unprecedented solidarity and support in the parliament, in the streets, of course, in political parties, in the civil society, in trade unions. This is unprecedented. This is the biggest and the longest solidarity movement in this country for a long time now. And that's why we need to keep working with the components of the British government to make sure that they take the right action, the effective impact.
Indeed, for coming in and talking to me. So what's the reaction? What is the mood inside Israel? Not just to Britain, but France and Canada declaring that enough is enough. Is it patriotic defiance, or is it a realization that things do need to change? Let's now talk to the prominent Israeli journalist, Noga Tarnopolsky. Noga, thank you very much indeed for joining us again. How has this news gone down in Israel?
I think that Israelis, to a certain extent, are very confused by it. And I should add that 22 other countries have joined the statement by these very important allied nations of Israel. But yes, I mean, there is a growing realization that there is now a concerted diplomatic effort to try and force the Israeli government's hand away from its chosen policy. And that is a new realization for the average Israeli, absolutely.
And what about attitudes to Trump? Because it does seem that President Trump himself has completely lost patience with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
It does. It seems that he's either chosen to ignore him or he's irritated with him. We heard today from Adam Bowler, President Trump's hostage envoy, that, quote, that he wants Netanyahu to wrap this up, for this war to end, which is a subject Netanyahu really refuses to discuss for now. But again, there's confusion among Israelis who, by and large, and in a pretty passive way, over the last, I would say, almost a decade, 8 years at least, kind of swallowed hook, line, and sinker Netanyahu's line about Trump being in his back pocket. And that clearly is not the truth. So Israelis are beginning to face that as well.
So what's the reaction? Has there been any official reaction from the Israeli government, and what is the Israeli press saying?
There was a strange reaction from the foreign minister of Israel, Gideon Sa'ar, who said that he especially recommended countries with a colonial background not to issue diktats to Israel. Just left it at that. The Israeli
I think that's
media,
us, yeah.
Yeah, and the French, possibly. The Israeli media, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, has not covered itself with glory, Israeli media. And similarly now, obviously, with notable exceptions, there are some exceptional journalists here as well, who are very clearly delineating the danger for Israel right now on the diplomatic front. Most of the media is kind of clumsily covering, oh, Trump doesn't like us anymore. Oh, the Prime Minister isn't speaking.
All right. Very, very interesting. Thank you so much for that, Olga Tarnopolsky. Thank you so much. Now then, separately, this week, one of the grandest of Cambridge University colleges, King's College, announced it was going to divest from the arms industry and any companies complicit in the occupation of Ukraine and the Palestinian territories. That is not small beer, because back in 2023, for instance, King's had invested £2.2 million in Lockheed Martin, Korea Aerospace and BAE Systems, among other companies. The college has been the scene of huge student protests in favour of Palestine. So has it, in the end, folded to the students? I'm joined now by the Provost of King's, the former Financial Times journalist, Gillian Tett. So, you folded, have you, Gillian?
We have not folded. Basically, we're an educational institution. We are training the next generation to use both their heads and their hearts in looking at the world. Their hearts in terms of having compassion for the world and seeking to do good and make it better, and their heads in terms of engaging in rational, thoughtful debate. And so we've actually been engaged for a very long time in an internal discussion about how we create an investment policy that is resonant with our values. This actually started, the conversation started before October the 7th, originally looking at climate change issues. The guiding principle has been to make our policy, our wider investment policy, proactive, consistent and mindful. And so it's not a knee-jerk response to anything. It's not a response to any one particular geopolitical issue. It's much, much wider. So we had by chance yesterday to vote inside our internal congregation around this, and the fellows and the students involved backed this shift in policy, which has very much come out of the entire community.
I suppose the obvious next question, Gillian, is where are the stopping points of this? You mentioned climate change. Lots and lots of companies could be complicit in lots and lots of things around the world, and you start to create an entirely ethical investment balance sheet, and you might end up with relatively small number of companies on it. So how do you, where do you draw the line?
Well, again, going back to the point that we're fundamentally about education, this has been an educational exercise for everyone. And so we're looking to have a sensible, serious debate about how we actually draw those lines going forward. We're not going to exclude everybody, but we're also mindful of sticking to our values. So this isn't knee-jerk, this is long-term, but it's simply saying that there are areas of the world that we don't think we should be using our financial resources to invest in. We are tiny compared to all the other big investment managers around the world. So we know perfectly well that simply shifting our own investment portfolio is not going to change the needle, but we want to do something that both provokes debate inside our community about how to look at the world mindfully and consistently, but also sends a wider signal about what our values are.
All right. One other obvious question, I suppose, is what your perception is of the feelings of Jewish students in Cambridge and at King's, because there's been a lot of coverage. I mean, I understand why this issue makes so many people angry and righteous, but I also understand that a lot of Jewish people feel very, very under attack at the moment. What's your experience of how they're feeling?
Well, I'll simply say this. This particular shift in investment policy goes far wider than the Middle East. We're keenly aware of the pain felt by Jewish students, some Jewish students, and the pain felt by other sides as well. There's a lot of pain to go around, and we've been pleading with people to go back to the point about hearts and head, to basically show empathy and compassion, and to engage in Socratic debate and to listen to each other above all else. We're actually having a series of seminars where we're trying to take different points of view and talk about the ideas, so we don't just get into these knee-jerk TikTok reactions. So we've been seeking to support students, and we've been seeking to support students on all sides.
Good. Well, Socratic debate is what we try to achieve at LBC. Thank you very, very much indeed, Gillian, for that. I want to know your thoughts as well. Is the UK government right or wrong in the statement they have made today? Text me on 84850 or email marr@lbc.co.uk. We're going to stay with this story next, getting the reaction of two politicians from opposing sides of the House. But you are listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, and the time now is 6:19.
This is LBC.
over.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:20. So, we've heard quite a lot about that big announcement on Israel. What about the politics of it all, however? In Parliament, the Conservatives were highly critical. Let's speak now to the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. Did you feel that the Foreign Secretary's language was too much? It was strong, but a lot of people would agree with it.
Well, I think there is a humanitarian crisis that does need to be addressed. And the fact that I heard the UN Under-Secretary General this morning saying that there were, babies in Gaza who needed that food. And if the UN Under-Secretary General is saying that, I'll take that at face value. And that aid categorically should be allowed in. Of course, at the same time, it's important to say that Hamas should release those hostages. I think 58 still there, been there for, a very long period of time. It's right that Hamas are removed from Gaza because they're persecuting the people in Gaza as well as committing atrocities. But let's be clear, that food should get in, particularly where civilians, including babies, are at immediate risk.
What about the announcement that we're going to suspend free trade talks?
Well, I think, to be honest, it's a bit performative. I don't think it'll make a great deal of difference. What really matters here is, firstly, getting that aid in, secondly, releasing the hostages, thirdly, removing Hamas, and fourthly, getting a lasting peace, which means a two-state solution for Palestinians so that Israel can live peacefully side by side with the Palestinians. Now, we're obviously a long way away from that at the moment, but I think any indication that the Americans are beginning to push a little more in that direction is welcome, because ultimately it is the Americans who carry the most influence in this situation.
Well, that's very interesting, because when you think of Britain, Canada, France, a lot of other countries now coming in behind them on that statement, and the United States now taking a different view. Is this the moment, do you think, where Israel is just going to have to change direction?
Well, I think that is possible. And I think when it comes to letting the aid in, that is the most immediate issue. And the UN Under-Secretary General said that he, the UN, and his colleagues had mechanisms to make sure that did get to civilians and didn't end up getting expropriated by Hamas, which is one of the concerns you hear expressed. But it needs to go beyond just that. That's the immediate crisis. Ultimately, we do need to bring a durable peace about, which does mean releasing the hostages, removing Hamas, but also establishing a two-state solution.
It's just, when I hear you talking like that, you don't sound a million miles away from what the government's saying, and yet your leader, Kemi Badenoch, says the Conservatives are the last line of defence for Israel in the House of Commons.
Well, I mean, obviously, we, and I hope not just the Conservatives, but others, do support Israel's right to exist and to defend itself, and we stand but I hope this is not just us, I hope it's others, foursquare against terrorism, and Hamas is a terrorist organisation. And that's why I've said, I think 3 times now, that Hamas need to be removed, eradicated from Gaza, and those hostages need to be released. And I suppose there are some people who may disagree with that, but I feel that quite strongly. But I also feel that the aid needs to get in, and I also feel that there needs to be a two-state solution so that Palestinians have their own state. You can believe both of those things. You can believe, as I do, in Israel's right to exist and defend itself, and also believe that terrorism should be eradicated, and also believe the Palestinians deserve their own sovereign state. You can believe all of those things, and I do.
And so do I, as it happens. Let me ask you about yesterday's other big announcement, of course, which is the UK-EU trade deal, described on your side of the House with words like humiliation and surrender and betrayal. But when you look at the reaction of business and, wealth creation in this country, you've had the CBI, you've had the Federation of Small Businesses, you've had Ray Newton-Smith of CBI saying that businesses do not need more politics, they need progress, and that firms will be breathing a sigh of relief about this deal. The British Retail Consortium, similarly, UK Hospitality. Aren't you on the wrong side of business this time?
Well, I'm not sure about that. Obviously, the fishing industry is absolutely devastated by this 12-year deal which Keir Starmer has reached. And I think, one of the things we have to do in Parliament is just take a step back and look at these things in the round. And, for example, when it comes to food standards and all of those issues, we have now once again become a rule taker, which means adhering to European regulations, not just today, but any future changes in European regulation that may come down the track. We have to simply accept those. This youth mobility scheme, about 60 million people are eligible. We don't know if there's going to be a cap or not. There are all kinds of quite important questions, which frankly Keir Starmer didn't even attempt to answer in Parliament today.
You mentioned Keir Starmer. Let me quote him from Parliament yesterday, speaking to the Parliamentary Labour Party. Party. He said the Conservatives are not our principal opponent. Reform are now our main rivals for power. And when you look at the latest opinion poll, where you are below the Liberal Democrats, you're in position number 4 in the polls, and a third of your voters have defected to Reform. He's got a point, hasn't he?
Well, I mean, he would say that, wouldn't he? I think you can't really... I'm not going to be taking political analysis from the leader of the Labour Party. He knows... He knows... It's very generous of him. He knows where his opposition is, which is the Conservative Party. We're the ones developing credible, detailed policies in my area, including on immigration. Right. Listen, Nigel Farage is a charismatic guy. He's got good slogans, but he doesn't have properly worked out plans. He made commitments in the Mail a week or so ago, added up to £100 billion worth of unfunded commitments. And when it came to debating this trade deal with Europe in Parliament today, as I understand it, he's off on some sort of jaunt in France. Keir Starmer knows where the opposition is. It's the Conservatives.
OK, Chris Phil, thank you very much indeed for that. And, of course, Gaza has deeply divided the left of British politics, causing endless political pain for the Labour Party. Could this announcement be the beginning of a healing moment? I'm joined now by the former Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, outside the Labour whip, but perhaps in a healing mood. I don't know. What did you make of the announcement from David Lammy? And in a way, particularly his language, which struck me as a big change.
He expressed the anger that is within Parliament itself. And I think not just on the Labour Party side, a number of Tories are actually expressing their anger as well about what's going on. So he got the tone of it right, certainly. But they're relatively small steps. And much as we urge him to adopt those and get on with it, he also said if this doesn't work, we'll take firmer action. So when he was questioned about that, he wasn't particularly forthcoming, and that's really the next step. We need clarity on what's next, because up until now, Netanyahu's avoided virtually every commitment that he's been asked for.
So, in terms of greater clarity, what people like you would be looking for is a complete ban on arms sales, including the parts for fighter jets, which we do still supply.
He moved on the trade negotiations today. That, to a certain extent, that's fine. He moved a bit on sanctions, that's fine. But on the arms sales, when questioned in detail, with evidence available, he would not budge. And this is about the supply of materials that will enable the aeroplanes to keep flying and keep bombing. He didn't shift on that, and there was real regret, I think, not just on Labour side, but parts of the House, other parts of the House as well.
One of the things that interested me is that quite a lot of the statement and quite a lot of the paperwork from the Foreign Office isn't about Gaza at all. It's about the West Bank, and it's sanctioning and naming a whole series of individuals and organisations who have promoted the illegal settlements in the West Bank. And that, again, struck me as a changed tone from the government.
It's a huge development. Now, we've been raising this time and time again. It's not been ignored, but it's never really been addressed properly. But now I think there is a change in attitude of the government. They realise that people want action now on the West Bank as well as with regard to Gaza. Do you know, I think this is a reaction to the public mood. It isn't just within the Labour Party. We've been
Those big demonstrations had an effect,
I think the big demonstrations have had an effect, but you know, the sight of the suffering of children, I think, has turned the whole atmosphere itself. And listening to some of the British surgeons that are out there, you hear what they're going through. I think people said, look, we can't tolerate this anymore, we've got to have action. But the next issue will be, if Netanyahu doesn't budge in the next 48 hours, what then? And then one of the issues we're raising is that we've got a coalition of the willing now in terms of those other states that have come on board with regard to the statement. Do we start saying to the Israelis, if you're not going to deliver the aid, we're going to have to start delivering the aid, break the blockade ourselves, either by sea or by air? In that way, you put the agenda, you put the onus back on the Israelis then, and the Americans.
And dare Israel to fire on British.
Exactly. And I actually think if Netanyahu doesn't move, something more dramatic has to take place.
Really, really interesting, John McDonnell. Thank you very much indeed for coming in and talking to us about that. Up next, we're going to hear from a senior Treasury minister as rumours swirl. The government could be considering scrapping the controversial changes to the winter fuel payment that has caused such a headache for the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. But first, time now, 6:30, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
The head of the Palestinian mission to the UK has told LBC better late than never after the government strongly condemned Israel's actions in Gaza. Speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr, Husam Zomlot is calling for a full arms embargo by both Britain and the US. A Conservative councillor says the Court of Appeal has shown no mercy to his wife, who failed to have her jail sentence suspended. Lucy Connolly was handed 31 months for a racist rant she posted on the day of the Southport attack last year. A coroner has concluded an 11-year-old girl who drowned during a birthday party at a water park was unlawfully killed. Kyra Hill got into difficulty in a designated swimming area at Liquid Leisure near Windsor in Berkshire in August 2022. LBC weather, showers in the west easing this evening, rain moving into southwest England and South Wales, drier in the north, a low of 2 degrees.
LBC This Morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron and Canadian PM Mark Carney have joined together to say the human suffering in Gaza is intolerable and said that Israel is at risk of breaching international law. Labour MP and Industry Minister Sarah Jones, it would appear the Israel Prime Minister is not listening. Your reaction to that, Minister?
We want the killing to stop. It is utterly abhorrent what we are seeing, and we have to have aid getting into those people who are suffering.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Priti Patel, who joins me now.
I don't think the British government has leveraged itself in any way, and all they've been doing basically is just chastising the Israeli government rather than finding practical solutions to get aid in. I think Britain has failed basically on this whole issue.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio, on Global Player and the new LBC.
Today.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:33, and a little while ago I asked for your WhatsApps and other messages about the huge shift of tone and indeed policy on Israel today from the government, and they are pouring in great speed. Lauren WhatsApps, the various players are running out of moves here, she says. Trump demanded a peace and Netanyahu has failed to oblige. Trump seems to have had enough of his intransigence and now appears to be doing an end run around Netanyahu to Saudi Arabia, with the Western European allies jumping on that opportunity. I think the music is playing for Netanyahu. Scott in West Hampstead says, I very much welcome the Foreign Secretary's speech in Parliament today. Israel had a perfect right to defend itself after the 7th October atrocities by Hamas, but it did not have the right to retaliate in a disproportionate way and to engage in an act of collective punishment. But Mike in Barnet takes a very different view. What about the hostages? He says, they are Jews, so no problem. It's easy for clueless Glammy and two-tier Kia to look great with their silly announcements. Let the world boycott all the innovation of Israel and see how long you can last. Return the hostages and problem solved. Many more such messages coming in all the time. But let me turn now to a more economic conversation, because below and around all the quite good news about trade deals to boost the economy, the threat of deeper welfare cuts and the possibility of tax rises are still big talking points for Labour MPs. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is still under great pressure ahead of her spending review, a crunch moment for the whole government, confirmed to be on June the 11th. That's a week after the equally big defence review goes public, so there's a lot going on. And I'm joined now by James Murray, the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury. Mr. Murray, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Let me start with something that the Chancellor told my colleague Sheila Fogarty only yesterday, and I quote her to be absolutely clear. I do understand, she said, the concerns that some people have about the level at which the winter fuel payment is being removed. That seemed to be a very, very strong suggestion that you are looking actively at the subject now.
Well, we stand by the decisions that we took, and those changes still apply. I think the point around means testing the winter fuel payment is that it's right to means test it. It's right to make sure that the wealthiest can't access the winter fuel payment, and to make sure that we make sure those who are on pension credit, for instance, who do need that support, are able to access it. And that's a system
absolutely right. Completely agree. But when you said the wealthiest, that's the point. It appears that the way that you have targeted this is far too broad, that you're hitting a lot of people who are by nobody's standard wealthy, and that is causing problems for your MPs right across the country.
Well, look, I know that when I was knocking on doors in the recent elections, people raised the question around the winter fuel payment with me. It definitely has come up.
So look at it again.
Well, it's definitely come up with me on the doorstep. I'm not going to pretend that the people haven't raised it as a question. And actually what people said to me quite a lot when I was knocking on doors is, OK, you've taken tough decisions, like on the winter fuel payment, like other choices that we took at the budget last year. What are we going to feel different as a result of those decisions? What change are we going to feel? We want to feel better off. We want to feel immigration coming down, a better health service. We want all those changes to be in our lives. And I could point to the fact that we put up the national minimum wage by £1,400 a year, NHS waiting lists down 6 months in a row.
The channel's going up, of course.
And I can point to all of the legislation we're putting through Parliament to pursue those gangs. But I think what people are impatient for is to really feel that tangible change in their lives. And I can point to what we've done in the first 9 or 10 months. People want us to get on and deliver the rest of it. And that's what we're focused on as a government.
You say that you're listening to people on the winter fuel payment issue. Are you actually hearing them? In other words, are you rethinking at any level what you've done?
Well, as I said, we stand by the changes.
So that's
we stand by the decision.
You're listening but not hearing.
We stand by the decision, and those changes apply. But I think what I hear from people is that they want more money in their pocket. And so if you look at what we've done around the triple lock, for instance, ensuring that the state pension has gone up by £470 this year. If you look at what we've done around the warm home payment, if you look at the other support we're giving through the Household Support Fund, all of this extra support for pensioners and for some of the most vulnerable are a response to the fact that people are saying they need more money in their pockets.
Some Labour MPs say to me that they're worried that June the 11th, which is the day that we'll get the big public spending review, is going to be the day in which Labour semi-officially becomes the party of austerity.
Well, I just don't think that can possibly be said to be the case, because if you look at the decisions that we took at the budget last autumn, which helped to then set some of the direction of the government, set the public finances. Those were decisions we took to get public services back on their feet.
But given the lack of growth since then, something has to give, doesn't it?
Well, look, the OBR's most recent forecast in terms of growth, and the OBR is obviously the official forecaster when it comes to long-term growth projections. At the most recent projections that they published at the spring statement earlier this year, they uprated growth forecasts as a result of decisions that we've taken.
A little bit, that's absolutely true.
The decisions we've taken around planning reform, for instance, that has increased the amount of growth in the OBR forecast.
Let me read to you something that Nick Williams, who you probably know, is a former economic advisor, very recently, an economic advisor to Keir Starmer, said recently. He said, the path of public spending is just not credible. Not to mend creaking local government, not to tackle rampant crime, not to meet the modern demands for defence, and certainly not to fill the fiscal hole from sharply cutting immigration. The bottom line, he said, is that taxes will have to go up. And he's right, isn't he?
Well, the only people that we go off in terms of setting the public finances is the OBR, because they are the official independent forecaster, and they're the ones who twice a year produce their forecast. When the Chancellor does her budget in autumn, to show how it adds up will be a job for the OBR to determine. And so they are the forecasters who I would look to when considering the growth in this country.
perhaps to mutual relief, one non-economic question. The Labour Party NEC has just voted to cancel the Labour Party's Women's Conference. It's been going on since 1920, but this appears to be because of the recent change in the law about what a woman is. And it appears the overall impact of that is you can't have a women's conference. What's going on?
Well, I think all organisations are reacting to the decision of the Supreme Court recently. We welcome the decision of the Supreme Court.
And you know what a woman is, so why can't you have a women's conference?
Well, I suppose all organisations are working out how to implement this policy in their own organisations, because it needs to make sure that it respects the clarity brought by the judgment, which says that sex is based on biological sex. But it also needs to make sure that we have wider protections for other groups. So I think all organisations are...
It's all a bit rum, though, isn't it?
Well, I think all organisations are responding to the Supreme Court judgment, and more guidance is going to be coming out in due course.
Do you think this is just going to be a brief postponement and that you will get back to having women's conferences quite soon?
Well, look, I'm not involved in those discussions, so I don't want to second-guess what the Labour Party is doing, but... all organisations are responding to the Supreme Court judgment. The Labour Party is included in that.
All right, James Murray, thank you very much indeed for coming in and talking to me. Let's get a bit more on that story now. As we were just saying, because of the recent High Court ruling on the question of what a woman is, the Labour Party today decided to cancel its Women's Conference, which has been held for more than a century, since 1920. From what I can make out, it can't decide who to invite. That, I think we can all agree, is an issue which needs to be discussed. And you might have thought that a conference of women would be the very place to do it. But apparently not. Let's talk next to Aggie, Chambre, LBC's political correspondent, who's been looking at the story all day. Aggie, both sides, the sort of LGBT campaigners inside the Labour Party and gender-critical women inside the Labour Party have been responding, and they're both pretty cross.
I think that's right. The Labour Party says, basically, as you heard James Murray saying just there, they're taking a proactive decision. They're concerned about the legal risks in the short and the long term, they say in a leaked document that I have seen. And basically, they felt like they couldn't be in a situation where they had all women shortlists, transgender women on all women shortlists, or they could have transgender women coming to a women's conference. And the reason for that is in the past, they have basically done it they've just had people coming to that on the basis of self-identification. And they're...
Sorry, I had to jump in. So it would be illegal for a transgender woman to go to a Labour Women's Conference and be allowed through the door?
They are concerned about protests. If they went ahead with it, they're concerned about protest direct action and basically the legal ramifications of that. I think from the people I've spoken to, they feel that this is possibly a potential overreaction, but they felt like there were 41 people voting on the NEC today. I don't have the exact numbers, it's just gone through in the last few minutes, but apparently this was basically a rubber stamping, and they did think that most of the people in the room were going to go forward with it. And they basically had these two options on the table. Option one was postpone. They say postpone the women's Labour conference. There's not another date to do it, and they've postponed it until there's a review. So it's effectively cancelled. And also...
and that's what they've gone for tonight.
That's what they've gone for. And then option two was basically suspending all positive action measures relating to women in the party. So that would basically be to scrap all women's shortlists, to scrap the women's conference altogether. I am pointed to by a Labour Party spokesman that there haven't been all women's shortlists used nationally since 2019. And basically they say that ministers are going to consider the Equality and Human Rights Commission Code of Practice when that's published.
What a mess. Now, you've got a little scoop for me, I think. We were talking about the criminal justice reforms and the 30% or 33% sentencing.
That's right. So I've got a little bit more detail on that. We're expecting David Gauke's review to come out quite soon. And essentially, we are expecting that with good behaviour credits, some people will be allowed to leave prison after just a third of their sentence. After that, there'll be this second third of their sentence, which will be under enhanced supervision. And now I understand that in that time, if you are recalled as in that enhanced supervision, then you will be sent back to prison for a set fixed 56-day period. Now, I know we talked last week about that 28-day period. I'm told that that is basically short-term short-term until about November. And this 56-day period will be permanent. And then here's the really interesting bit. The final third of your sentence, you can't be recalled at all. Now, you could get another charge and go back to prison that way, but there won't be recall in that final third of your sentence.
It doesn't sound like a third of a sentence to me, but anyway, I'm sure it'll all make sense in due course. Aggie, Chambre, thank you so much. In a few minutes, we're going to hear from a prominent Scottish politician about the changes she's trying to make in prostitution law north of the border in an effort to make it safer for women, though not everybody agrees with her methods. The time now, 6:45.
Coming up at 7, Ian Dale leading Britain's conversation. Next on LBC.
At risk.
This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 6060 973.
6:47. There's a move in the Scottish Parliament to change the law on prostitution, prosecuting the punters, the men who buy sex, while supporting the women selling it. It's a bill which tries to copy the model used in Norway and Sweden, and it's similar to one implemented in Northern Ireland 10 years ago. But Scottish sex workers, including an organisation called National Ugly Mugs, argue that the bill will actually make life more dangerous for them, pushing prostitution further underground and making it harder for people to report violence. It is a fascinating debate and an important one. Ash Regan, the Alba MP and former SNP minister, is behind the bill, and she told me exactly what it would do if it made its way through the Scottish Parliament.
So I'm proposing that we change the law on prostitution. So we shift the balance of criminality onto the buyer. The buyers in prostitution are 99.9% male. And most of the sellers, we think somewhere between 90 and 95% of the sellers are female. So clearly there's a gendered aspect to this. So male perpetrators onto female victims. And I'm suggesting that we create a new criminal offence that would criminalise the purchase of sex. It would decriminalise the sellers and go further than that and quash any prostitution-related convictions that sellers had previously had. And then also it would bring in a new aspect, which I think is very important, which would allow a right to support for those that had been in prostitution. And that would include a right to support to exit if they so wished.
Is there not a sort of odd market imbalance there if it's legal to sell sex but illegal to buy it? How will that work? I mean, presumably the market will continue.
Well, if you conceptualise prostitution as violence against women, which I do, which the women that work in the support services in this area, and also the Organisation of Councils in Scotland, which is called COSLA, we all conceptualise it as violence against women. So when you have that sort of updated view of the people that are working in prostitution who are selling sex, we understand it a bit differently than we used to maybe 20 or 30 years ago. So many women that go into selling sex, quite a large proportion of them have come through the care system. Many of them have been sexually abused as children. And a large majority as well now are being trafficked. So they're sex trafficked into the country. They're being coerced and maybe being controlled by others. So we wouldn't say that, these people are entering into it through really a free choice. We would understand they're being victimised. Yeah, they're being exploited.
Yeah.
So I really don't think we should be criminalising people for their own exploitation. So that's the rationale behind that. And then the rationale for criminalising the buyer is that the market of prostitution is driven by people buying sex. So this model, which is often referred to as the Nordic model, because the first country that did it was Sweden. So they did this about 25 years ago as part of a drive for equality between the sexes, and conceptualised that if you criminalise the buyer, you challenge that demand, you drive the demand for prostitution right down, which shrinks the market of prostitution, which means less people are harmed in it. And it also means less people are going to be trafficked into your country.
That makes an awful lot of sense. And I think Norway as well as Sweden have done this in the past, and Northern Ireland too?
Yeah, so Northern Ireland, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, France, actually fairly recently, as well as Canada and Israel.
I'm interested, by the way, you don't use the term sex worker, you say prostitution. That is a Scottish thing, isn't it?
No, I think this would be common against everyone who thinks that prostitution is violence against women. We would use phrases like women exploited in prostitution, prostituted women. If you listen to the voices of survivors, many of them are absolutely disgusted by the idea that anyone would refer to what they've been through as work.
Yeah.
Or a job like any other.
I absolutely get that. Now, as you know, some of the groups representing prostitutes or sex workers in Scotland don't like this idea. They think it'll drive the entire business further underground. It'll make it harder for women to complain about violence, report violence against them, and put them in more danger, not less. Now, these are people who have been involved in this and therefore presumably know a bit of what they're speaking about. So what would be your message to them?
Well, I think that pimps and traffickers obviously want to move to a different model. So they would be advocating for something that we would call perhaps decriminalisation or a legalisation model, which many people on the other side of this argument argue that it's safer. But unfortunately, the data just does not support that. So if we look at two countries in Europe, not too far away from us, Sweden changed the law about 25 years ago, and no prostituted woman in Sweden has been murdered since that law was changed to the Nordic model. By contrast, in Germany in 2002, they went to a sort of a decriminalisation model, and 99 women in prostitution have been murdered, and there have been 60 attempted murders there. So the data is very clear that if you don't go for the Nordic model, what you end up with is prostitution expanding, more women are being sex trafficked in, more women are being harmed, and women are, quite frankly, absolutely not safe, because prostitution is inherently extremely dangerous. So I'm trying to prevent women being drawn into prostitution by challenging that demand.
So to put it very bluntly, less prostitution, less violence, less murder, more prostitution, more violence, more murder, and by criminalising the punters, the men involved, you make prostitution less popular.
Absolutely. And we don't talk about the punters very much, do we? It always seems to be about the women, about the stigma and the shame of women being involved in prostitution. Really, I think we need to reframe that, and we need to put the shame where it belongs, on the men that are, so entitled that they feel that it's appropriate to buy another human. If you think about this in a different way, you would certainly be able to argue that this would constitute a type of modern day slavery. And it's the type of slavery that's happening in every town and city in the UK. We know that. We think at the moment there's about 8,000 women working in prostitution in Scotland. That's not an insignificant number. And about 1 in 10 men in the UK are currently buying sex. Compared to Sweden, where the last time they surveyed on this, it was less than 1%. So that just shows you, if the law is successful, it drives down the number of men that are purchasing sex. Sorry,
Ashley. Let's just hover over those figures again, because they're quite remarkable. You're saying one man in every 10 in the UK buys sex, and it's 1 in 100 in Sweden. That's a massive difference.
It is. The Swedish stats, that is the lowest recorded number or percentage of men that would consider buying sex or have bought sex in the whole of Europe. So yes, you can see because that law has been in Sweden for 25 years, which is quite a long time, it's very embedded into the culture in Sweden. And in fact, in Sweden, it is completely unacceptable to talk about or to go and buy sex. Whereas in Germany, where they've gone the other way, they have something like 12-story brothels with a different fetish on every floor. And 90% of the women working in prostitution in Germany are trafficked.
That's absolutely fascinating. It's a very interesting conversation. Ash, how much support do you have in the Scottish Parliament? Is it likely that this measure will actually become law?
Good question. In the Scottish Parliament, one of the first hurdles that you have to get over is you need to show that you have cross-party support. So I did it. So I think that's the first maybe gauge of whether there might be support in the Parliament for this. I received the cross-party support in about 2 days, which is good. That showed to me that there was an interest in this. But yes, I need to achieve a simple majority at stage 1 in order for the bill to progress, and a simple majority at stage 3. I've had, I would say, quite good support from individual. No party has come out saying that they will support it as a party as yet, but I've had good individual support from colleagues in the Conservatives, in the Labour Party, and some from the SNP. But the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party up here, it's in their manifesto, and they are actually pro-exploitation. So I'm not expecting to get any support from them at all.
OK, Ash Regan, the very best of luck, and thanks for talking to LBC today.
Thank you.
It's 6:56. Greggs, the high street food shop which has become a staple of modern Britain, is moving its self-service food and drink behind the counter in an experimental move against those who take self-service a bit too literally. Shoplifting offences recorded by the police rose by 20% last year. Greggs aren't applying this to all of their 2,600 bakeries around the country, but to a limited number in particularly theft-prone areas. Let's speak now to the Chief Executive Officer of the British Retail Consortium, Helen Dickinson. Helen, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. I mean, Greggs are doing pretty well as a company, but clearly they're losing so much to shoplifting, they're having to change the design of their stores. Is this an unusual experience in retail?
The sad truth of that is that it isn't an unusual experience. So we are seeing record amounts being invested by retailers to combat shoplifting or theft is what it is. I mean, this is stealing. This is unacceptable behaviour that has been so prevalent across the industry for the last few years, and where we've seen a major uptick. So whether it's moving product around, whether it's investment in CCTV, in screens to protect staff from this violence and abuse that often comes from, the members of the public that aren't there to shop but are there to cause nuisance or to shoplift. So unfortunately, it is a reflection of just what we are seeing more widely.
And presumably responding to it is a cost in itself. In other words, Greggs, by putting stuff behind screens or under the counter, are going to sell fewer pasties or fewer sandwiches or whatever it is. And that will be an experience, again, across retail. So at what point are you experiencing companies really having to dig deep to protect themselves?
Well, I think, any business, and Greggs is, very successful, as you said, business would think super carefully about what those trade-offs look like and making sure that they're putting their investment in the right place, first and foremost in their mind, and I'm sure in the mind of every retail chief executive and the leaders of retail businesses, is keeping their employees, their colleagues safe, and making sure that issues that cause flashpoints in shops or restaurants aren't being put in sort of harm's way, if you like. So what can they do to mitigate many of those things? And that investment is costing the industry about £1.8 billion a year.
Well, the cost is one thing, but putting shop workers in danger of their lives in some cases is a terrible, terrible indictment of what we're going through at the moment. Helen Dickinson, thank you so much for talking to LBC tonight. I'm going to be back with you tomorrow. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the brand new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you prefer. You can pause and rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. Download it for free from your app store right now. Coming up on 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish, but now it's time for Ian Dale.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Today, the British government lost its patience with Israel over its failure to let enough aid into Gaza and the new operation on the ground. The French and the Canadians are saying similar things. Is this the day Israel finally lost the support of Western democracies? If you support the Palestinian cause, do you say, well, at last, better late than never? Or if you support Israel, do you think all this decision will do is to give succor to Hamas?